Deep inside the pitch-black waters of the Florida Everglades, a highly classified ecological operation was silently underway. It was exactly 2 a.m. on a humid Tuesday when a massive convoy of heavy, unmarked transport trucks cut their engines on a remote, restricted dirt road. For months, rumors had circulated within the scientific community, but what the state officials were about to execute seemed completely insane to the public. They began opening the massive steel gates of the trailers, and in less than 3 hours, over 10,000 apex predators, furious, hungry, and heavily armored American alligators, were unleashed directly into the swampy wild. To the average citizen, this looked like an absolute death sentence for the state of Florida. Why would environmental agencies dump thousands of man-eating reptiles into an ecosystem that was already struggling to survive? Was this a catastrophic government blunder, or a desperate, final attempt to stop an invisible ecological monster that had been eating the state alive from the inside out? The mainstream media was completely left in the dark. But what happened just 48 hours after their mass release? Left-field biologists and apex predator experts completely speechless, and nobody, absolutely nobody, expected the brutal chain reaction that came next. The secrets of the swamp. To truly understand why Florida's Wildlife Commission took this extreme, multi-million-dollar gamble, we have to look back at the hidden, bloody war that has been raging in the shadows of the Everglades for over 2 decades. The Florida Everglades isn't just an ordinary swamp. It is a delicate, unique, biological treasure, a multi-billion-dollar ecosystem that filters the state's fresh water. But in the early 2000s, a foreign invader quietly arrived and flipped the ancient food chain completely upside down. The Burmese python. Originally imported from Southeast Asia as exotic pets, these massive, stealthy constrictors were either released by overwhelmed owners or escaped into the swamps during devastating hurricanes like Hurricane Andrew. With no natural predators in North America, these snakes multiplied at a terrifying, exponential rate. They didn't just survive, they conquered. Within 15 years, the statistics became horrifying. The python invasion successfully wiped out 99% of the local raccoon and opossum populations, 98% of bobcats, and over 85% of the white-tailed deer. The Everglades, once loud and bursting with diverse wildlife, was rapidly becoming a silent, biological ghost town. Every traditional method deployed by the government failed miserably. Highly paid bounty hunters couldn't find them in the thick sawgrass. Advanced thermal tracking drones couldn't see through the dense canopy. Even specialized canine units were pulled out after dogs began disappearing into the dark waters. The state was losing the war, and the ecosystem was on the verge of total collapse. That's when a radical underground group of ecological engineers proposed a solution so dangerous and unpredictable it was initially blocked by federal authorities. They looked at the data and said, if human technology cannot hunt these invaders, we must artificially breed and deploy an army of native monsters to do it for us. The strategy. But you don't just drop 10,000 wild, unpredictable alligators into a fragile wetland and hope for a miracle. This wasn't a random release. It was a highly calculated, engineered military-grade operation known behind closed doors as Operation Apex Balance. Behind the walls of restricted breeding facilities in central Florida, scientists had spent nearly 3 years selectively conditioning a specific genetic line of American alligators. These weren't just any ordinary gators taken from local lakes. These specific predators were chosen for 3 critical traits: extreme territorial aggression, massive jaw-crushing power, and most importantly, an adapted hunting behavior specifically trained to target large, slithering reptiles. Before the Midnight Convoy ever rolled out, every single one of the 10,000 alligators underwent a surgical procedure to have a specialized military-grade micro-GPS satellite tracker embedded directly into the bony plates of their tails. The strategic plan was simple, yet terrifying. Instead of spreading them out evenly, the Wildlife Commission decided to saturate the absolute worst, most heavily infested python breeding zones, areas like Shark Valley and the deep marshes of Big Cypress. The objective was to create a brutal, inescapable resource war. The state wanted to flood the ecosystem with so many native predators that the Burmese pythons would no longer have a safe place to hide, hunt, or nest. If the invaders wanted to keep control of the swamp, they were going to have to fight 10,000 heavily armored, highly aggressive native dinosaurs for every single square inch of it. But when these two massive species finally collided in the dark waters, the war didn't go the way anyone in the control room predicted. In fact, the very first wave of satellite data coming back to the laboratory sent a wave of absolute panic through the entire scientific team. The collision. During the first 30 days of the operation, the deep Everglades transformed into a literal, primal battleground. As the satellite tracking maps lit up with thousands of moving indicators, field cameras began capturing unbelievable footage. The rivers were churning. The GPS trackers showed that the alligators didn't just scatter randomly as expected. Instead, they instinctively organized themselves into specific hunting clusters, completely locking down the deep-water channels and river bends. For the first time in over 20 years, the Burmese pythons met an enemy they couldn't easily overpower or choke out. Massive 12-foot gators were actively ambushing 20-foot pythons, dragging them into the deep water in violent, muddy battles. But just as the scientists began to celebrate, a bizarre and terrifying anomaly appeared on the tracking monitors. The data showed that hundreds of the largest, most aggressive released alligators were suddenly moving completely away from the designated water channels. They were intentionally pushing deep into the high, dry marshlands, areas where American alligators almost never venture because it exposes them to intense heat and limits their mobility. The research team feared the worst. Had the engineered predators broken their conditioning? Were they starving and searching for alternative food sources? The situation turned critical when the tracking lines showed these massive gators heading directly toward the borders of local, rural human neighborhoods and hiking trails. Local news networks caught wind of the movement and panic spread. Authorities issued emergency warnings for residents to keep their pets indoors. The entire multi-million-dollar project was on the absolute brink of being permanently shut down as a historic public safety disaster. But when teams of armed biologists rushed out into the field with airboats to investigate why the gators were moving into the dry zones, what they witnessed with their own eyes shattered everything modern science knew about wildlife behavior. The unexpected miracle. The 10,000 alligators weren't hunting humans, and they weren't lost. They were digging. By pushing heavily into the dry, parched areas of the Everglades, these animals began performing an ancient instinctual ritual. They were creating what ecologists call alligator holes. Using their massive, muscular tails like bulldozers and their heavily armored snouts like shovels, they cleared out tons of thick mud, peat, and decaying vegetation. They dug deep down into the limestone bedrock until they hit the natural water table. And this single, instinctual act changed the fate of the entire state of Florida. During the brutal winter dry season, the Everglades normally dries up significantly, leaving thousands of native species without water. But these newly created gator holes suddenly became deep, permanent pools that retained water year-round. What happened next was a classic textbook example of a trophic cascade. These alligator holes became literal life-saving oases for the entire ecosystem. As the surrounding marshes dried up, millions of native fish, turtles, and amphibians flooded into the gator holes to survive. Because the alligators were guarding their territory, the invasive pythons couldn't approach these water holes without being immediately hunted and killed. With the python population successfully decimated by an estimated 45% in just the first 6 months, the natural balance restored itself with shocking speed. Small mammals like raccoons and marsh rabbits began breeding safely again. Rare wading birds returned to nest in numbers that hadn't been recorded since the 1970s, utilizing the trees directly above the gator holes because the alligators unintentionally protected the birds' nests from tree-climbing predators. The 10,000 alligators didn't destroy the Everglades. They completely re-engineered it from the ground up. They proved to the world that human machinery, traps, and bounty hunters are nothing compared to the raw, ancient power of nature's original kings. Today, Operation Apex Balance is studied by environmental scientists across the globe as one of the most daring, controversial, and wildly successful ecological experiments in human history. It proved that sometimes, to fix a broken environment, you don't need artificial technology. You just need to unleash the wild. But as the remaining Burmese pythons begin to adapt, growing larger and learning to avoid the alligator territories, a chilling question remains. Did Florida permanently fix their ecosystem? Or have they simply created a more aggressive, deadlier breed of invaders that will eventually learn how to fight back? What do you think about this extreme government gamble? Was releasing 10,000 apex predators a stroke of pure scientific genius? Or is it a ticking ecological time bomb for the future of the American mainland? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. If you found this deep dive fascinating, make sure to smash that like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on all notifications so you never miss another thrilling story from the edge of the wild. Thank you for watching, and we will see you in the next one.